Our world is one of mystery and symbolism, there is no doubt, fellow mystics, and for one to decipher its history and reveal its fruit, which we call gnosis, he must be willing to observe, listen, understand, and open up his heart. There is no other way, and there never was. The mysteries of our world are concealed, for they would cause tremendous pain to the ones who are not yet ready to embrace their lesson. Apostle Paul, in a most profound metaphor written in his first epistle to the Corinthians, said that meat is the food of the strong, and that most people must be fed with milk, for they are not yet ready to receive the teachings of Christ. But those who seek shall always find the answers, for nothing stands in the way of the man whose heart is pure and virtuous. Many mystery schools have been formed throughout history to initiate and guide humanity in its next spiritual stage. From one astrological age to another, these mystery schools and their teachers burned the ashes of the past, rekindling the flame, as Manly P. Hall beautifully put it, in order to lead humanity towards progress. And one of these mystical schools we now know as the Rosicrucian order. Welcome to Agrippa's Diary, the gathering place for modern mystics. Rosicrucianism, an intricate spiritual and cultural movement, traces its roots back to the early 17th century Europe and has evolved to manifest itself in various forms in contemporary times. The movement draws its distinct character from an eclectic blend of esoteric wisdom, spanning elements of mysticism, alchemy, Christian Gnosticism, and an array of philosophical and spiritual teachings. The origins of the Rosicrucian order are steeped in mystery, traditionally linked to an enigmatic figure named Christian Rosenkreuz. Rather than being viewed as a literal historical figure, Rosenkreuz is often perceived as a symbolic entity. We'll talk about that in more detail later in the video. The term Rosicrucian is derived from rosy cross or rose cross, potent symbols embodying the teachings of the order. The public emergence of Rosicrucianism can be traced to two anonymous manifestos published in the early 17th century, Fama, Fraternitatis Rosicrucis, dated 1610, which translates to the fame of the brotherhood of the Rosy Cross, and Confessio Fraternitatis, or the Confession of the Brotherhood, dated 1615. In 1617, a third anonymous volume was published, The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. While the first two texts serve as an introduction to the laws and background of Rosicrucianism, The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz is particularly interesting for another reason. Drenched in profound allegory and symbolism, the story depicts the enigmatic Christian Rosenkreuz being invited to a celestial wedding. This spiritual nuptial ceremony, however, is not of the ordinary sort. It's a chemical wedding, a term that implies a process of alchemical transformation, a symbolic journey of purification and unification, akin to the refinement of base metals into gold in the alchemical tradition. Throughout the text, Rosenkreuz encounters an array of symbolic characters and undergoes trials, all of which serve as metaphorical representations of the inner transformational journey. His experiences are emblematic of the initiate's path to spiritual enlightenment and the transcending of dualistic consciousness. Thus, the chemical wedding not only paints an allegorical portrait of the alchemical process, but also provides a roadmap for spiritual transformation and illumination. These seminal texts hinted at the existence of a clandestine brotherhood of enlightened minds, guardians of ancient wisdom who were subtly shaping the spiritual evolution of humanity from the shadows. Rosicrucian teachings pivot around concepts of spiritual enlightenment and inner wisdom, with the goal of unraveling the profound mysteries of existence. The emphasis is on comprehending and practicing the metaphysical laws that govern the cosmos. Adherents are encouraged to align their lives with these laws, thereby promoting their personal development and contributing to the collective advancement of humanity. In an era marked by profound turmoil, the enticing promise of spiritual transformation beckoned many, with manifestos stimulating the quest for esoteric wisdom. Esteemed occult philosophers from the 17th century, including the likes of Michael Meyer, Robert Flood, and Thomas Vaughan, exhibited a keen interest in the Rosicrucian worldview. Within his fascinating work, Silentium Post Clamors, written in 1617, Meyer offered an evocative portrayal of Rosicrucianism, tracing its origins to a primordial tradition. He writes, "Our roots reach back to the Egyptian and Brahminic civilizations, intertwining with the profound mysteries of Eleusis and Samothrace. We draw inspiration from the Persian Magi, the intellectual pursuits of the Pythagoreans, and the enlightened thought of the Arabs. This passage is often used by modern organizations that claim Rosicrucian heritage to strengthen the argument that the Rosicrucian order has its roots in the mystery traditions, philosophy, and myths of ancient Egypt, dating back to approximately 1500 BCE. And while there is no solid ground on which one can stand when making this claim, it can't be denied that the symbolism, principles, and rituals performed by the Rosicrucians draw on those mystical and ancient sources. So, while the institution itself was officially formed in the late 16th or early 17th century, its roots go back much further in history. Throughout medieval Europe, mystical knowledge was often necessarily couched in symbolism or disguised and hidden in the love songs of troubadours, the formularies of alchemists, the symbolical system known as the Kabbalah, and the rituals of orders of knighthood. For example, Francis Thynne, one of the most intriguing figures of the 16th century and an adept alchemist, wrote a series of manuscripts that could serve as landmarks for Rosicrucian history. Thynne's fascination with the occult becomes prominently discernible in his treatise Homo Animal Social, a manuscript dated the 20th of October 1578. In it, he explores topics like Egyptian hieroglyphics and the Druids. He delves into the intricacies of notes, signs, tokens, characters, or voice signs that delineate general differences in sounds. Thynne exhibits an obvious enthusiasm for Kabbalah, lamenting the loss of what he considers the most profound knowledge, echoing the sentiments of the learned Kabbalist Mr. D, the author of Monas Hieroglyphica. Thynne recounts how Hebrew letters remained unwritten until the time of Adam's descendants, who, before the Great Flood, were custodians of this knowledge. Citing Josephus, Thynne suggests that the descendants of Seth etched their knowledge of celestial phenomena onto pillars. Furthermore, Thynne makes a veiled reference to the chaotic kingdom of traitors at the Tower of Babel. Here he critiques the masons whose poor construction skills led to their downfall, symbolized by their loss of the original pure language. Thynne also wrote a number of poems around the year 1600, which describe the early days of the forming of a secret society at a Rose Tavern. But I digress. Suffice it to say that, if one so desires to go down the rabbit hole, he could find many hints in many works of that time referring to a mysterious order that has a rose on a cross as its symbol. I will provide the links to some of these works on my Patreon page, where the transcript to this video will also be attached. So the next question that naturally arises at this point is, who is the founder of the Rosicrucian order? If we conclude that Christian Rosenkreuz is just a symbolic figure, the only reasonable answer is that there is no such thing as one founder of the order. Christian Rosenkreuz might be a legendary archetype, but someone certainly wrote the Rosicrucian manifestos, and we can be certain that we are not talking about a single person here, but of a group. So, the founders of the order could also be the authors of these books, and this is where we transition to a more speculative territory. There are two figures that stand out the most as potential candidates for this title: Johannes Valentinus Andreae and Sir Francis Bacon. Johannes Valentinus Andreae was a German theologian and writer living in the late Renaissance period. His theological and philosophical knowledge, along with his known writing abilities, make him a plausible candidate for the creation of the Rosicrucian manifestos. This becomes particularly compelling when we consider the themes presented in the manifestos and those explored in Andrea's acknowledged works. The Rosicrucian manifestos portray a utopian vision of spiritual enlightenment and societal reformation, ideals that Andrea often expressed in his own writings. Perhaps the most intriguing piece of evidence is Andrea's later life reference to the Rosicrucian Fama and Confessio as a ludibrium, or jest. This statement has led some to believe that he may have had a direct role in the creation of these works, perhaps even as a sort of intellectual exercise or allegory that was later taken more literally by readers. Some scholars of esotericism suggest that Andrea said this to shield his clerical career from the wrath of the religious and political institutions of the day. Remember, this was still a time of great persecution, and some claim the Rosicrucians were the descendants of the Knights Templar, who were burned alive and persecuted for heresy by the Pope and King Philip IV. Around 1530, more than 80 years before the publication of the first manifesto, the association of cross and rose already existed in Portugal in the convent of the Order of Christ, home of the Knights Templar, later renamed Order of Christ. 3 bochetes were, and still are, on the aboboda, or vault of the initiation room. The rose can clearly be seen at the center of the cross. In this historical context, those who could be labeled as Rosicrucians would face great persecution, so the founders and authors needed to exercise discretion. Andrea was also part of an intellectual circle in Tübingen, Germany, known for its interest in esoteric ideas and societal reform. This aligns closely with the themes presented in the Rosicrucian manifestos, lending further credence to the idea that he, possibly along with others in his circle, may have contributed to the creation of these texts. On the other hand, Sir Francis Bacon, a philosopher, statesman, and advocate of empirical science in England, has also been proposed as a potential author of the manifestos. Bacon was known for his vision of a society enlightened by knowledge, a theme that resonates strongly with the principles espoused in the Rosicrucian texts. This vision is perhaps most clearly articulated in his work, The New Atlantis, which describes a utopian society guided by scientific inquiry and wisdom. Moreover, there are numerous symbolic and thematic parallels between Bacon's writings and the Rosicrucian manifestos. Some enthusiasts and researchers have pointed out similarities in how Bacon and the manifestos discuss the pursuit of knowledge, the reconciliation of religion and science, and the transformative power of wisdom. However, while both Andrea and Bacon present compelling cases, it's important to remember that these theories are speculative in nature. The true origins of the Rosicrucian order and the authorship of the manifestos remain a mystery to this day. It's more likely that the Rosicrucian texts were the product of a collaborative effort by a group of like-minded individuals. In fact, some tie the formation of the Rosicrucian order to the Invisible College, the precursor group to the Royal Society of London. The concept of Invisible College is mentioned in German Rosicrucian pamphlets in the early 17th century. Ben Jonson, a contemporary of William Shakespeare, referenced this concept in his Masque, a type of allegorical theatrical entertainment called The Fortunate Isles and Their Union, performed in 1624. In this context, the Invisible College may have symbolized a group of wise and virtuous individuals who, although hidden from public view, exert a beneficial influence on society. This interpretation is similar in spirit to the Rosicrucian notion of a secret fraternity working behind the scenes to enlighten and reform the world. The idea of such an order, exemplified by the network of astronomers, professors, mathematicians, and natural philosophers in 16th century Europe, promoted by such men as Johannes Kepler, Georg Joachim Rheticus, John Dee, and Tycho Brahe, gave rise to the Invisible College. This was the precursor to the Royal Society founded in 1660. It was constituted by a group of scientists who began to hold regular meetings to share and develop knowledge acquired by experimental investigation. Among these was Robert Boyle, who wrote, "The cornerstones of the invisible, or as they term themselves, the Philosophical College, do now and then honor me with their company." If you saw my video on Isaac Newton, you already know he was also a member of the Royal Society and a devoted student of alchemy and Hermeticism. In fact, many individuals associated with the Invisible College were interested in alchemy and the Hermetic philosophy, which are also key elements of Rosicrucianism. So to conclude, one may confidently say that the Rosicrucian order was formed by a handful of individuals, which were prominent thinkers of that time, rather than one individual. But let's talk about Christian Rosenkreuz and his potentially symbolic meaning in this story. According to the legend, Christian Rosenkreuz was born in 1378. He was the last descendant of the Germelshausen, a noble German family which flourished in the 13th century. Their castle stood in the Thuringian forest on the border of Hesse, and they had embraced Albigensian or Cathar doctrines, combining Gnostic and Christian beliefs. The whole family was put to death by Conrad von Marburg, except for the youngest son, who was only 5 years old. He was carried away secretly by a monk who was an Albigensian adept from Languedoc. The child was placed in a monastery that had already come under the influence of the Albigenses, where he was educated and made the acquaintance of the 4 other brothers who were later to be associated with him in the founding of the Rosicrucian brotherhood. The legend states that during his stay with the monk, Rosenkreuz was educated and prepared for a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. While on his journey, he eventually ended up studying in Damascus and then in Egypt. From there, he moved to Damcar, where he was initiated into the Magnus Opus, or Great Work of the Alchemists, and then to Fez in Morocco, which at the time was considered a center of learning. Fez is home to the University of Al-Qarawiyyin, which was founded in 859 AD and is often cited as the oldest continually operating university in the world. During his journey, he is said to have studied under Turkish, Arab, and Persian sages, possibly Sufi or Zoroastrian masters. But it was in Fez where Rosenkreuz is said to have been introduced to the elemental beings and started gaining a deeper understanding of nature and the universe. Manly P. Hall writes, "From the Arabians, CRC also learned of the elemental peoples and how, with their aid, it was possible to gain admission to the ethereal world where dwelt the genii and nature spirits. CRC thus discovered that the magical creatures of the Arabian Nights Entertainment actually existed, though invisible to the ordinary mortal. From astrologers living in the desert far from the concourse of the marketplace, he was further instructed concerning the mysteries of the stars, the virtues resident in the astral light, the rituals of magic and invocation, the preparation of therapeutic talismans, and the binding of the genii. CRC became an adept in the gathering of medicinal herbs, the transmutation of metals, and the manufacture of precious gems by artificial means. Even the secret of the elixir of life and the universal panacea were communicated to him. Enriched thus beyond the dreams of Croesus, the Holy Master returned to Europe and there established a house of wisdom which he called Domus Sancti Spiritus. This house he enveloped in clouds, it is said, so that men could not discover it. What are these clouds, however, but the rituals and symbols under which is concealed the great arcanum, that unspeakable mystery which every true Mason must seek if he would become in reality a prince of the royal secret? Over time, Rosenkreuz gathered 8 members in his presence. According to the story, each member of the group undertook travels to different countries to acquire knowledge and understand different cultures and practices. They returned every year to the House of the Holy Spirit to share their learnings and insights. When Rosenkreuz died at the age of 106, his brethren buried him in a 7-sided vault inside the House of the Holy Spirit. This vault is said to be filled with magical symbols and allegorical images, and at the center laid an altar with the preserved body of Rosenkreuz. The Fama Fraternitatis tells us that Rosenkreuz's vault was discovered 120 years after his death. The vault was illuminated by an artificial sun, and the brothers found, among other things, a compendium of the knowledge Rosenkreuz had accumulated, inscribed in the mysterious Book M. The discovery of the tomb was seen as a signal to make the existence of the Rosicrucian order known to the world, which marked the beginning of the spread of Rosicrucian ideas and teachings. The vault, filled with symbols and allegorical depictions, represented the immense wisdom and knowledge accumulated by Rosenkreuz and his brethren. Some occultists, including Rudolf Steiner, Max Heindel, and Guy Ballard, have stated that Rosenkreuz later reappeared as the Count of Saint-Germain, a courtier, adventurer, and alchemist who reportedly died on the 27th of February, 1784. Steiner once identified Rembrandt's painting A Man in Armor as a portrait of Christian Rosenkreuz, apparently in a 17th century manifestation. A beautiful and legendary story indeed that can take one in many confusing directions. However, its symbolic meaning is equally fascinating. Remember, this story is based on the Rosicrucian manifestos. The narrative outlined in the manifestos is typically understood symbolically, as was customary with all Hermetic and alchemical texts during that period. The texts do not expressly mention the birth and death years of Christian Rosenkreuz. However, a pair of statements in the second manifesto suggests the year 1378 as the birth year of our Christian father. As mentioned earlier, according to the story, he lived to be 106, indicating his death in 1484. The establishment of the order is similarly inferred to have taken place around 1407. Yet these numbers and the derived years aren't interpreted literally by many occultism scholars. They perceive them as symbolic and allegorical cues intended for those who are initiated. This interpretation draws its rationale from the manifestos themselves. On one side, the Rosicrucians evidently embraced the Pythagorean tradition of visualizing objects and ideas numerically, as indicated in the manifestos. On the other, they plainly state, "We speak unto you by parables, but would willingly bring you to the right, simple, easy, and ingenuous exposition, understanding, declaration, and knowledge of all secrets." For example, the tomb of CRC is described in the Fama Fraternitatis as a 7-sided vault. On each of its 7 walls, there are inscribed 10 symbols or figures. They are neither described nor explained in the Fama Fraternitatis, but they were later used by the members of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn to develop their symbolism and rituals. In fact, the original grade structure of the Golden Dawn was heavily inspired by Rosicrucianism. The founding members of the Golden Dawn were also Master Masons and members of Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia. We'll dive into that in another video, so make sure you subscribe to the channel. Anyway, the metaphorical nature of these legends lends a nebulous quality to the origins of Rosicrucianism. The opening of Rosenkreuz's tomb is thought to be a way of referring to the cycles in nature and to cosmic events, and as well to the opening of new possibilities for mankind, consequent on the advances of the 16th and early 17th centuries. Similarly, Rosenkreuz's pilgrimage seems to refer to the transmutation steps of the great work. Similar legends may be found in Wolfram von Eschenbach's description of the Holy Grail as the lapis exilis, guarded by the Knights Templar, or in the philosopher's stone of the alchemists, the lapis elixir. Also, Rosenkreuz's crypt, according to the description presented in the legend, is located in the interior of the earth, recalling the alchemical motto vitriol, which stands for Visita interiora terrae rectificando invenies occultum lapidem, translating to "Visit the interior of the earth, and by rectification thou shalt find the hidden stone." Its meaning is the following: visit the interior of the earth represents the call to introspection and self-examination. The earth represents oneself or one's interior life, including the unconscious mind. The process urges one to delve deep into their own psyche to understand their true nature, thoughts, desires, and fears. Rectifying suggests the process of correction or purification. Once a thorough self-examination has been undertaken, the next step in the process is to purify oneself or to rectify errors, weaknesses, or flaws. This can involve various personal growth processes, moral improvements, and spiritual disciplines. Invenies occultum lapidem translates to "you will find the hidden stone." This represents the end goal of the alchemical process, achieving the philosopher's stone, which here represents self-realization, enlightenment, or inner transformation. This might be compared to achieving a state of wisdom, peace, or understanding, in which one has transcended base desires, compared to base metals in literal alchemy, and achieved a state of higher consciousness or spiritual purity, compared to gold. So, the Rosicrucians were also adept practitioners of spiritual alchemy, and not only that, they also left an indelible mark on Freemasonry. In fact, 2 Rosicrucian-inspired Masonic rites emerged toward the end of the 18th century. The rectified Scottish rite, widespread in Central Europe where there was a strong presence of the Golden and Rosy Cross, and the ancient and accepted Scottish rite, first practiced in France, in which the 18th degree is called Knight of the Rose Cross. According to Manly P. Hall, the secret doctrine that flows through Freemasonic symbols, and to whose perpetuation the invisible Masonic body is consecrated, has its source in 3 ancient and exalted orders. The first is the Dionysiac Artificers, the second the Roman Collegia, and the third the Arabian Rosicrucians. In his book, Lectures on Ancient Philosophy and Introduction to the Study and Application of Rational Procedure, the Venerable Hall writes, "The mysteries of Egypt and Persia that had found a haven in the Arabian desert reached Europe by way of the Knights Templars and the Rosicrucians. The Temple of the Rose Cross at Damascus had preserved the secret philosophy of Sharon's Rose. The Druses of Lebanon still retain the mysticism of ancient Syria, and the dervishes, as they lean on their carved and crotched sticks, still meditate upon the secret instruction perpetuated from the days of the 4 caliphs. From the far places of Iraq and the hidden retreats of the Sufi mystics, the ancient wisdom thus found its way into Europe. Several initiated Rosicrucians were brought from the mainland to England, where they remained for a considerable time designing the symbolism of Freemasonry and incorporating into the rituals of the order the same divine principles and philosophy that had formed the inner doctrine of all great secret societies from the time of the Eleusinian in Greece. In fact, the Eleusinian mysteries themselves continued in Christendom until the 6th century after Christ, after which they passed into the custody of the Arabians, as attested by the presence of Masonic symbols and figures upon early Mohammedan monuments. The adepts brought over from the continent to sit in council with the English philosophers were initiates of the Arabian rites, and thus through them the mysteries were ultimately returned to Christendom. Upon completion of the bylaws of the new fraternity, the initiates retired again into Central Europe, leaving a group of disciples to develop the outer organization, which was to function as a sort of screen to conceal the activities of the esoteric order. Such, in brief, is the story to be pieced together from the fragmentary bits of evidence available. The whole structure of Freemasonry is founded upon the activities of this secret society of Central European adepts, whom the studious Mason will find to be the definite link between the modern craft and the ancient wisdom. The outer body of Masonic philosophy was merely the veil of this Kabbalistic order, whose members were the custodians of the true arcanum. Does this inner and secret brotherhood of initiates still exist independent of the Freemasonic order? Evidence points to the fact that it does, for these august adepts are the actual preservers of those secret operative processes of the Greeks, whereby the illumination and completion of the individual is effected. They are the veritable guardians of the lost word, the keepers of the inner mystery, and the Mason who searches for and discovers them is rewarded beyond all mortal estimation. So, as you can see, Rosicrucianism is much more than just a myth. It is one of the primary keys to unlocking the history of Western esotericism, and not only that. Rosicrucianism had a profound impact on our history and the shaping of our modern society, whether we are aware of it or not. It is the junction point, a fork in the road in the development of modern spirituality. Although at first glance one might think this legendary mystery school has faded out in history, its teachings and practices continue to be shared with those who seek illumination. But beware of those who claim to be the descendants of the Rosicrucians. There are many who fail to understand their history and, engulfed in an air of arrogance, have adapted mere fragments of this knowledge into New Age practices that fail to teach the fundamental lessons first. And these fundamental lessons require one to cleanse his soul by embracing compassion, the acceptance of universal knowledge, the desire to heal and protect, and the advancement of spiritual development. Only once all of these principles are adopted and embraced out of a pure heart, one may truly call himself a follower of the Rosicrucians. And with all of that being said, it's up to you to connect the dots, fellow mystic. Remember, this but an introduction to the Rosicrucian mysteries and is part of a larger series on this subject. Now, all of this considered, I am also interested to hear your opinion. Do you think Christian Rosenkreuz actually existed? Or his story is just an allegory that has been used to explain and reveal the history of the order? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I am eager to hear your thoughts, fellow mystic. If you want to delve deeper into the world of ancient wisdom and esotericism, be sure to like, share, and subscribe